All right, everybody. We've got 2 p.m. Eastern time here on the calendar, or on the clock rather. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So the first thing here that we're going to go through, just welcome to the webinar. I'm Jess Spalding. I'm going to be one of the senior implementation specialists over here at Smart Service. Today I'm joined by Jake Strine. He's been going through the process of becoming a trainer over the last, about 2 months or so. So he's going to be in the webinars now moving forward. Today he'll have a little bit of a lighter role. He'll be going through some of the questions and a couple of sections with you, but as time progresses, we'll get him, acclimated a little bit more. Go ahead and say hi there, Jacob.
Hello there, everyone. How are we doing today?
Yeah. So after that, the basics of this particular webinar is going to be going over all of the equipment functionality that you guys have inside of Smart Service. So think of it like a deep dive. We're going to go over quite a bit of stuff in here, but go ahead and get into our slideshow. There we go. So if this is your first time with one of our webinars, just keep in mind that we do have these every month on the first Tuesday. It's free to sign up. It's basically a 1-hour training class with 2 trainers. So keep that in mind. Definitely show up for these if you want to. You'll find all of our previous broadcasts at the link there on the screen, so smartservice.com/webinar. Those are going to be available sometime around 24 hours after today. And as another note, as we go through all this equipment stuff here, if you're new to Smart Service or you've not really used your equipment functionality very much, make sure you're asking us questions. In the little panel that you have on the side of your screen, you're going to have a question section. So you can send us those questions. We'll answer them over the air here and help you guys get some answers for that kind of thing. Along with that, it's important to note that at the end of every webinar, we have a survey that goes out where you guys can let us know how we did for our webinar. Let us know if there's anything that you guys would like us to cover with the survey as well. So definitely give us some feedback. We want to know, how we did, and we also want to know what you guys want to see, because these webinars are driven by the customer base. So if there's something that you guys are really curious about, definitely let us know. But with that, let's go ahead and kind of take a look at what we're going to be getting into in the actual webinar for today. So go ahead and move on here. So what's in the webinar today? We're going to be going over all the equipment functionality. So that's going to cover things like, what is it inside of Smart Service? What are we talking about when we're talking about equipment? The differences between the 2 different types of records that are going to be roughly the same, but they do have some different functionality. So your equipment versus assets. And then we're also going to go over some of the examples for some of the specific industries that would be using the equipment. It's kind of important to note that not every industry is really going to be using equipment, but it could be potentially modified to be used for you. You just kind of need to play around with a little bit, see what you'd want to put in there. But for the most part, it's going to be, HVAC companies, fire protection companies, lawn care, plumbing, electrical. So there's a lot of different industries that are going to find some use in this. But Jacob's going to be kind of taking you through, these couple of little items here. Once we go through covering kind of the broad overview of everything, we'll be getting directly into Smart Service. I'm going to take you through how to create your equipment records through the Smart Service program at the office. That way, any of your iFleet technicians or anybody at the office will be able to see that stuff. As we go through that, it's also important to note that you don't have to put this stuff in from the office. If it's something your techs do, we're going to be going through iFleet here in a little bit after we go through the office stuff. It's essentially going to be the same functionality, just with a slightly different user interface. But again, I said earlier, we're going to go through some key industry specifics for this. Should get you at least most of the way where you need to be for setting up your equipment. And then we're also going to, again, cover the serviced equipment functionality that we added in and some of the sorting and filtering and grouping stuff as well, just so you can get another little run through of that. Once we do all that stuff at the office, we're going to kind of rinse and repeat and go out to iFleet, and we'll be taking a look at that from the iFleet perspective. And we'll go through how to add the equipment, how to mark it as serviced. If you need to apply like a charge, let's say you had to change out a blower motor or something like that, we'll go through how you would set that up. So we'll go through some of the residential side of stuff, and we'll also go through some of the commercial side things. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and kind of get started in the Smart Service side of things. So for the first section, there's going to be quite a bit that we're going to go over. But right before we get into that, I'm actually going to hand over to Jake so he can take you through, kind of the general overview of what we're going to be looking at here.
Alrighty, so if anyone had attended our last webinar, you probably know that we did go over equipment already, but we did want to cover it again in a little bit of a greater extent as the functionality behind it changed a little bit, and some of the information that you can place inside of equipment now has changed a little. So we want to make sure everyone's starting on the same level here for this. And then I do want to talk about for people who may not be aware of what equipment is, say you haven't used it in Smart Service yet, I do want to let you know that equipment is the customer-owned, say, equipment that you're going to be utilizing. So, whether or not it's a air conditioner that you're servicing, whether or not it's a smoke alarm, fire extinguisher, etc., it's all going to be things that the customer themselves own. And then the difference between equipment and assets is that an asset, is something that your company owns. So say like a truck or like a blower motor or something like that, whereas the equipment is just purely going to be customer owned.
Yeah, so that little bit of overview there taken care of. We're not really going to dive into asset stuff today because that's all stuff that we covered. For the most part, it was completely covered in the last webinar, so that's not really something we're going to get into. Just keep in mind that key thing. Equipment is the stuff your customer owns. Assets are things that your company owns. But with that all being said, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Smart Service. So you guys should see that up on the screen now. So the first couple of things we're going to go through are, how you're going to find your equipment inside the system. There are a few different ways. So the first way that you can find it is by basically just going to your search screen, and then inside of here, you can look up a customer, you could look up a location, and you could also potentially look up the equipment record itself. So we can see here, customer, location, or equipment, some of the basic functionality for the search screen here. But basically, if you switch over to equipment and we go in here and we start looking for things, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw in an asterisk to give us a general list of everything that we have in here. And that's going to bring up all the customers' names. And then we can see here, Philip, he's got a couple of pieces of equipment. So does Joe. So you can see how it's all kind of laid out in here. If you wanted to go into that record, all you got to do is click on the name over here, and it'll take you to the record that you're looking for. So once we get in here, we would pop over into the equipment section to try to, get an idea of what all's on file for this customer. So if we go into equipment, so I'm at my customer level or I'm at my location level. It kind of depends on how you're set up. If it's at the customer level, you would see it here. This means, let's say they have rental properties or something like that. So you'd have maybe the landlord as Philip Aberdeen here, and then you could have a location for one of their rental properties. And then each one of those is going to have its own unique set of equipment. All the details like model and serial number, those are all going to be stored per record there. So you don't have to worry about stuff getting crossed. But aside from looking around trying to find this stuff in Smart Service, there's a lot of stuff that you can actually put into a piece of equipment to kind of get an idea of what's going on site for a customer. So basically inside of your equipment tab inside of Smart Service, when you're in here, you'll have all your different grouping and sorting and filtering options at the top here. We can go into those drop downs. You'll get your options that you have set up, and I'm actually going to take you back through the types here, how to set up a group, and then models, pretty basic stuff there. So that one is just going to be the model for the equipment, and then you can do some different sorting in here if you need to. So we created a couple of little examples in here for right now. We're going to go ahead and take a look at one of those, and then we'll go through the process of adding one of these in as well. But all you have to do is click on the record, and it's going to actually open that up for you, and you'll be able to see all the details that are inside that piece of equipment so far. So if you are doing this from the office, it's not necessarily going to be up to you to always fill in every detail. If you're setting up this 20 kilowatt generator or something like that, you might not know model and serial number information from the office level. The technicians will always be able to update this stuff for you. You can make sure that it's always in there from the technician's perspective by making those required fields, which is something I'll kind of show you here in a little bit. But as we can see here, I've got my generator all set up. It's got some details in it. I would leave this for my technician to go in and fill in the rest of it if I needed to. as we kind of go down the list in here, we can see we've got all these new little functionalities that we kind of covered a little bit in the last webinar, but your types and your groups. So those are going to be something that we're going to get into as I create my next equipment record. So I'm just going to go ahead and save and close this guy, and we'll do the full dive in on the next one. So what I could do is I can come in here, add equipment, and it's going to bring up a blank shell for me to fill out. So in here, you'll have a couple of options for how you can name things. Most customers are typically not going to go with this option that I'm going to cover with you, but it is available if you have a bunch of things inside your QuickBooks. So similar to what we have here, you might just grab this out of the list of items. If you do that, it'll come pre-filled with all your descriptive information and all that kind of stuff. But most of the time, we want to keep this fairly generalized. So instead of doing, all of this information, we could just do something simple like, wood stove, type that in there, and then it'll still have the description if you've selected it, but you can always clear that out and put in a custom description there as well. So for the name and the description fields, those are completely customizable. But we're gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna add in, a furnace here. So to say furnace. If there are multiples of something, so let's say you're in a commercial setting and you're working on rooftop units for a HVAC company, you would want to make sure that you're labeling those out. So rooftop unit number 1, number 2, number 3, each one of those might have the same model, but the serial numbers would probably be different there for that. But with this one, we'll go ahead and leave it kind of basic like this. The next thing we'd want to do is go in here and find the type of equipment that we have. So these are things that only you guys at the office are able to add in. So I can go in here and I can add new. That's going to let me go in and add whatever I want to this list or remove or inactivate something if it's not needed anymore. So I could actually come in here and I could just start typing in this last line and that'll add that in there for me. So let's say do, just as an example. So add that in, save. That's now an option in my list. So with that out of the way, I'm just going to go ahead and select something here. So furnace is part of the HVAC system. So we'll go ahead and do that. In the description, we can put in whatever kind of information we want. You can put in things like capacity, manufacturers. If it's not necessarily going to be HVAC, it might be something like maximum load for a generator or something along those lines. So this is just a general description about the equipment itself. So we'll do something like this, just to get something in there. And then for these next two options, these are going to be something that not everybody uses. From what we kind of see in the training side of things, this is usually something that's going to be used more on like the fire protection industry side. So, you're going out and you're doing all of your different extinguishers. That customer might have, a bunch of different extinguishers that are all the same. So, your ABC 10 pounds or something like that. So we won't necessarily want to have, 15 different ABC 10-pound fire extinguishers in here necessarily. So we could set this up for quantities and service rates for how much it costs to refill. And these feed into the item section of your job. So when we go through and do the add equipment functionality, we'll be able to, have it pre-fill like a service rate and a quantity for you. If you don't need that, if it's something that's always going to be up in the air as you're going through your job, you're always going to be able to, customize the amount that you have out in the field for whatever you're doing with that equipment, which we'll show you as we go through iFleet. But again, this is not something that everybody uses. If you do put something in here, it will default to that price if you go through the steps that we're going to go through as I add one of these to a job. So that's going to be for like your time and materials. So you'll be able to go in there and get that kind of stuff set up so it's all automatically filled out. If you're working from like a commercial side and it's going to just be, I want to tell the customer I worked on something, you'll be able to do that through another method. So the new serviced equipment functionality. But I do see one question here. Stephanie asks, what about from an appliance company standpoint? So if you're going to have like a standard service rate for appliances, you could do something like this if you're still referring to the service rate stuff here for equipment. So you could definitely do that. But if it's going to be something like you have to go out and do a troubleshoot, you don't know, what it's going to cost to actually replace a part, you might want to kind of consider that as you're setting some of this stuff up, Stephanie. Because if you need to replace a filter on a refrigerator, that filter might, cost one amount from one vendor, but it could also be way more expensive from another one. So we wouldn't have as much control over what we're billing for with that. But good question there. Definitely keep those coming so that we can get some of these things out of the way for you. But we'll go ahead and keep moving. So we're going to go to our group next. So the grouping functionality is one of the new ones. So in here, depending on your industry, this is, again, something that's a little bit more specific to an industry. You can have different areas of the job site set up. So, if it's a multi-floor, multi-story building, you can do, first floor, second floor, rooftop, something outside, a utility shed. So you can go in there, you can set those up by using the add new. Primarily, this is going to be like a field technician thing that they'll do. You're not going to know where this stuff's at from the office level, so the technicians will be able to add into the groups. But as an office user, you do have kind of full control over everything, so you could theoretically go in here and uncheck one of these to make sure it doesn't show up in the list again and things like that. But if we wanted to add something new in here, so furnace, I doubt that's going to be on a rooftop or out in a shed or on the first or second floor. So we might want to do a new one. So I'd come in here, basement, save it. And now from this, I can do another new, and I'm going to go ahead and make a sub option in that basement. So we can do HVAC room in the basement. So again, the technicians can add that stuff in, and when they're done doing that, they'll be able to select it just like you would. So they'll have kind of like a little drop down that they can jump into. And then from there, grouping and locations kind of go together is a good way to kind of use this. So maybe not inside of a house or something like that, but as you're out in the field, like on a rooftop or out in the middle of, a big yard or something like that, looking for, the top of the septic tank or something, you could use the grouping to give like a general, backyard. And then in the location field, you can give more details about where it's actually at out in that yard. So you can either type something in, so next to the big oak tree, right beside the white chair, or you could do a little GPS pin and drop your actual coordinates for where you're standing from iFleet. But I do see a couple of questions coming in here, so let me take a look at those real quick. Let's see. So we had a question here, is it possible to move equipment from one location to another? You do have an option, but it would be something that's more like we take everything from one location, move it over to another location. So it's not something where you'll be able to go in and pick and choose what it is, but we can use the lookup tool. So let me go ahead and save this for a second. We'll go look at that. So inside your general information, in between your addresses, you'll have the little magnifying glass. And that'll let you go in and look up whatever you're looking for. So we're going to be looking at the customer and location level, or maybe prospect and location. And we would basically just go in here and check that off after we find where we want to pull that equipment from in the list. So we'd be able to go in here, grab something from Lisa, hit OK, and it'll pull those records over for you. But again, you don't get to pick and choose. So something important to note with that. If it's something like you need to do that and it's like one specific thing, there are going to be some other things that I would probably have you do in here. So if we go back in, wrong one, let me go back in my furnace. So in here, we can use the statuses. So, we replaced it, it's broken, it's in use, we replaced it, it's not in use. So this will help you kind of keep track of that stuff as well. So there is a way, but it's not going to be exactly, pick and choose kind of thing. It's going to be a all or none. But with that status down there, you could theoretically even just go in and set up a new piece of equipment and make that one the one that's in use, and then mark the old one as a replace not in use kind of thing there. But outside of that, you got your model and serial number fields here. So those are pretty basic. So those are going to be the things that you want your technicians to fill out. If you don't know what they are from the office, so as they go out into the field, these might be set up as required fields for them to fill out. So to show you where those go, we're going to go ahead and go to our dashboard, settings, and then down here under the iFleet settings, you've got your require model and serial number fields. So right here. So if you turn those on, when a technician opens up a piece of equipment, if it's new or existing, if those aren't filled out, it requires them to fill them out. Otherwise, they can't back out of that record. So if they do run into that, you would have kind of a need for them to have a system in case that information is not available to them. So they would just type in something like NA, whatever you guys would prefer for that kind of setup there. Last couple things here are just going to be some date picker options that you have. So you'll have things like your installation date. So in here, we can go in and say, okay, we installed this on the 4th, and that'll keep track of that for us. You could also type into that field. Same for your warranty. So if I wanted to set up a warranty for, manufacturer warranty, let's say, it's good for 2 years. So we'll go ahead and set that as 6/4/2022. So in your search screen, you'll be able to see this stuff. In reports, you'll be able to see it. So there's a lot of functionality that you'll be able to kind of use inside of Smart Service to identify things that are coming up with expiration dates and even with your last service date and your next service dates. So something with these two fields that is pretty important, you don't have to fill these ones in manually. So if you're going out and doing, let's say, a quarterly service for a customer, or you're going out annually or semi-annually, whatever the reoccurrence pattern might be, if your guys are marking that they are working on this stuff, it's going to fill this in so that we know that we did the service on this piece of equipment, specifically on this date for our last visit. And then whatever your reoccurrence pattern is, it will generate the next service date. So if you wanted to go in and run a report to see when we did the last thing and when the next one is, you'll be able to pull that up. Aside from that, you've got some equipment fields here. So equipment fields are going to be very specific to each customer. Not every customer wants to keep track of the same things. Some things might be relevant to one industry where they're not relevant to another. So I've just got a couple of samples set up here. This would potentially be another thing that maybe you could use there, Lorna, where you have some user fields set up so that you can kind of indicate what's been, swapped out and things like that. But as we can see here, the very first one is just a drop down. So I could say, is this a replacement? Yes or no. The next one is going to be a date field. So I'd have to type in a date. So this date can go in kind of whatever format you might want. So we could do something like this. You could also do, let's say, the year. So 2020, 06, 05. So you can put those in. As long as it's formatted like a date, it's going to work. The number of uses here, this one is going to be what we would term as an amount field. So this means that you can only put in numbers or decimals. And then additional notes is just a basic text field, so you can type whatever you'd want in there. Now, if you don't have these set up, it is important to note that these are newer features for the drop-down and formatting options here. So if you're not on 106 Smart Service, you won't see these options. But if you wanted to set them up, save and close. I want to go back and look at my user fields. Inside of user fields, equipment. So you put in your labels here, and then you go in and do your format. So if you use a drop-down, you get to put in the options so your technicians do not, clutter this up with a bunch of junk that doesn't make sense to anybody but them maybe. And then you just save it and it'll add it in there. And then for the date, basically it just gives you the option out of that drop-down there. So from there, the number of uses, again, that's the amount. And then additional notes is just text. So you can apply those different types of formats on any of your different user-defined fields as well, just as a little side note. Back here to this customer. So we'll go back into our equipment record for the furnace. The next thing that we're going to be looking at here are going to be the notes for the equipment. So this is going to be where your technicians can put in things like persistent issues. So the belt's always breaking on this thing, or it's constantly blowing fuses or something like that. So these are just going to be general notes for that technician to fill out for you. If there's anything that your customer is relaying to you at the office, you could also put that in here as well. The technicians will see that stuff from the field there. But as with all of our note sections, I do recommend using our timestamp functionality so that we can see who put the note in and when. This is something I also recommend for the iFleet users. So damage that's noticed. Well, I can't type today. And just general notes. So we got some notes in there, and we can move on. So the next thing we have is attachments. So this functionality is going to work in tandem with our Dropbox integration. So attachments are going to give you the ability from the Office level to go in here and say, add attachment. You can search for a picture. You can grab a manual. So pictures would be like a picture your customer might have sent over to you with some damage or something like that. And an attachment would be like a manual from the manufacturer, so we know what we're looking at in here. The guys out in the field will actually have access to these as long as you have your Dropbox integration turned on and set up. So they'd be able to go in and open up a full-scale manual for something through the app there. But this is going to work a lot like your correspondence functionality here. So it's very similar. So you basically find your item, select type there, go to select picture, or actually open picture. And then we'd find that photo that we want. It'll import it in here, or for the PDF, it does the same, or a manual. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. I'm not going to add anything to it. With this, you'll have the same, image folder structure that we have for customers and jobs. So you'll be able to go in there and find all the specific photos for each individual piece of equipment. But that's pretty much it for the general setup of equipment. Definitely make sure that we're keeping the questions coming through. But for the next couple of things that we see here, we'll go through the filters that we have. So type, I could go in and say, okay, I just want to look at everything that's listed as part of my HVAC system. So that drills me into just my furnace. I could also go in and use my different groupings. So I can go in here and say, okay, I want to look at the stuff that's in my basement. So if you've got a bunch of different pieces of equipment all over the place on site there, some of the stuff might all be in one room, so you can group it all together, and then when your guy out in the field filters down to that, they would just see that stuff. And that's going to help them from the field perspective a little bit more than it does for you at the office in most cases. We'll go ahead and switch that back. The next thing we have here will be our models. So we can go in here and we can see, you get all the different options that you have inside the equipment there that you can kind of filter by. So if we just want to look at the things that have this, we do that. And then your sort by functionality, that's very basic stuff there. So by default, it'll do name, but you could also go in here and do types. So you can see this one doesn't have a type. And then it goes and moves further down. But aside from that, those are the setup pieces. So the next thing that we would want to take a look at is what happens on the jobs that we have in the office here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a job that I set up earlier. So inside of our job, you're going to have the same functionality that we've always had, where we can go in and basically say that we worked on a piece of equipment. So from the office level, if you're not aware of this, it's this little green plus, add equipment. So when we select that, that's going to let us go in, see all the equipment that we can work on this particular customer's location. We would check off what we need. The quantity is going to be the quantity for whatever item we're choosing over here. So if I was to come in here and find, let's say, a filter, so let me see if I can grab that real quick. This would basically indicate back here in the background on our items that we're using this piece of inventory for this particular piece of equipment. So I could go in, I'm just going to go ahead and grab my filter. If they needed 2, we can do a quantity of 2 and then save. So whatever you check off there is going to get added in here with whatever item it is. And then inside that description, you're going to see details about that equipment. So model serial number, the name of it, all kinds of good details here. This will show up on the invoice for the customer as well at the end of the job. But you can do that repeatedly if you need to. So if you're working on like multiple different pieces of equipment while you're doing this, you can do that. And then there's also the option to basically select everything here. And then whatever we put into these drop downs is going to basically grab that from your item list and then insert it. But let's see, we got a question here. Is there a way around having to pull the item from QuickBooks? So yes, that's actually going to be the next thing that I'll show you here. There is kind of an option that kind of works the same way, but you'd have to have like a general, parts item or something like that. So I think we should have one in here. So let me try to find that. But this would give your technician the ability to fill in some details and put it in as an item. If we don't pull it from the item list in QuickBooks, you're not going to be able to mark it as like a billable service. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's going to be a way that you can indicate that it was done but it doesn't actually show anything on like an invoice there for you, only on your work orders. But let's see here, before we move on, let's see. So Joshua asked something there. We're going to get into that here in a second, actually. How would we show that we perform maintenance but not create an invoice? So that kind of functionality is going to come down here in your serviced equipment tab. So at the office, you can do this, and they can also do it from the field. So we're going to go ahead and actually just jump down there. So we've looked at everything we have in the item section. Go down to serviced equipment. And then here we can do all the same grouping and filtering options that we want to do. So you'll be able to group the list as a whole on the left, or filter and sort it. And then once we push some stuff over here to the right, you'll be able to do those same filter and sorts. So if we went out there and we worked on this piece of equipment, but we don't want to bill the customer, so commercial setting here, we just want to show them that we worked on it. We use the little arrow, that'll take that equipment from the right, move it to the left, or vice versa there, sorry, a little dyslexic there. Basically, we would open this up, and from the field perspective, they'll be able to do this as well. So they would go in here and say, so they can leave a note like that, save it. And they can do that for any one of those pieces of equipment there if they need to. What this functionality does for you is when you do a work order, so from the field or from the office, work order, when we get in here at that work order level, you're going to see one or the other here. You don't have to do both. You pick which one you want to do. So the first one up here is going to let you bill for it. The second one is just going to show that you did some work on a specific piece of equipment. But the more equipment you add into there, the more things you'll have in the list. So just basically number those off for you, show you what the equipment is, where it's at, when it was installed, and then whatever note you put in. So we'll go ahead and close out of that guy. And then if we accidentally did this, so let's say we didn't actually service this piece of equipment, we tapped the wrong thing, you can actually hit your little delete button over here, get rid of it. Let's see. Okay, so Lorna asked, when you're doing the add equipment button back here, is it pulling up the entire item list or just items that you've marked for a certain piece of equipment? It is going to pull up the entire list. So when we go in here and we add equipment, this little drop down has all the stuff that you have in QuickBooks. So it could be a service, it could be a part, materials, you know, it could be really anything that you would use out of that list so that you can bill for whatever you're doing with it. And then let's see. Got a couple of questions came in here, so let me take a quick peek at those. So Taylor asks, if you do the serviced equipment, does that go over to QuickBooks on the invoice? It does not. So if you want that to show up on the invoice, you would want to use the functionality back here, where we went in and we did the add equipment functionality. The other one is going to be for when you don't want an invoice with that information on it, you just need to be able to indicate to somebody that that information's there. But outside of that though, let's see. That should be pretty much everything that we have here for the office level. So we're going to be switching over to iFleet now. Give us just a second here to make sure that we can get this part set up and up and running here. So just bear with me for one moment. All right, so we should be able to see the iFleet app up on the screen. So we're going to go ahead and kind of start working our way through this one. Again, it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. And while we were doing that little switch around, we got a couple other questions that came in. So let me look at those real quick. So Chris asks, when using add equipment and job items, once posted to QuickBooks, the invoice shows every note for that entered in under that unit. If that happens to you, so if I'm remembering right, and we'll take a look here with the iFleet app, this might be something that we shouldn't be doing here. So we'll take a look at that one a little bit behind the scenes as well, but you could theoretically just go into that item, Chris, and delete the notes piece out of it before you do your post. And that would remove it. But from the iFleet perspective, I believe that it's gonna just pull in some of like the item name, the item description, and things like that. So we'll go ahead and kind of take a look at that here, and then we'll see what we need to do for that. So we'll go ahead and kind of take a look at iFleet. So I basically got the same job that we've been looking at over here in Smart Service. So Philip Aberdeen, I'm gonna go ahead and open up that profile, tap my little magnifying glass. Once we get in here, along the left-hand side, I am on an iPad, so just kind of keep this in mind. I'm on an iPad, so if you're on a phone or anything like that, you'll basically see a seamless scroll. If you reorient, so you flip it into landscape view, it'll reorient, and then you would see this, two individual sides there. Just as a little note there, if anybody's using phones, sometimes they're a little bit more unwieldy. But for the equipment stuff, the main list of equipment is going to be technically listed over here. And actually, let me do a quick sync cycle. 1 second on that. And then we'll be able to sync the iFleet again here in a second. Let's do that real quick. There we go. So I can pop into here. Now, this is something that I can kind of indicate to you here as well. So when we're looking at the equipment section over here, we can see all those equipment records that I pulled in. They got pulled into this so that we can actually see, what's on file, what's actually already been marked as service. So if it's been marked as serviced at the office, that would be your cue as a technician to maybe just go in there, open that up, because the office has indicated to you that, you need to fill in some details for this. But I'm going to back out of that for a second. I'm going to show you how to do that part here too. So we're going to go into equipment. We're going to see all the equipment that is listed for this customer. Along the top, you're going to have your plus button, which we're going to get into in a second. That's to create the equipment. You'll have the little stair step here. This is going to be your sort functionality. And then you'll have the little down arrow. That's going to be your filter. Now, one thing with this, if you put in a filter, that filter is going to remain. So if you don't want it filtered at a later time, you want to come back in here and hit the clear button in the top right-hand corner, and it'll reset you to all of the all options in here. So if I do this and then X out of that, that filters me into just those types of equipment. If I go back in there, filter again, clear, switch me back to all, and I can go ahead and hit the X button again, back to everything. Now, aside from those couple of buttons at the top, you got your basic search functionality, which is also going to include some barcode functionality, which you can find more information about on the knowledge base. So at the knowledge base, search for barcode, you'll find it there, but that'll teach you how to kind of get those set up. So with a barcode, you basically put it into the equipment description or the model and serial number fields, and then you'd be able to scan something and pull it directly out of the list. So that being said, we can tap on any one of these records just kind of in the text area there, and that'll actually open it up for you. So the tech could actually go in, update more information in here as they need to. So if the model and serial numbers aren't filled out and we want to get those, they would go ahead and update that information. So I'm going to put one of those in. And then we don't have a serial number, so I can leave that. Anything the tech does in here is going to go back to the office so you guys can see it as well. And any previous or future techs will be able to see it as well. So we're going to go ahead and hit back. That'll save that record the way that we updated it. And then from here, just to kind of go over the basics for adding this in, you hit your plus button. In here, you're going to have all the same kind of fields that we had back at the office level. It's just in a different format. At the top, you can tap into that field at the very beginning. And then that's going to give you a cursor there. So you could type in your custom naming, or again, you could use your little arrow at the other, the far right-hand side, and that'll let you go in and search for something. So for this one, I'm actually just going to go ahead and do a custom name. So we're going to go ahead and we'll do an alarm. monitoring system. Whoa. There we go. So we go in, we would drop in our description. So you tap into that, it'll open it up so that you can go in and add in whatever kind of description you might want to have. Hit your little back arrow there, or if you're on an Android device, save. And then you'll have your item status. Is this the piece of equipment that was replaced? Is it being installed now? Is it not installed yet? We're just kind of holding on to it for a little bit. The equipment type, again, that's something from the office level. So you guys at the office will set this part up for them, and they'll just select things out of the list. So I'll go ahead and grab my control. And then again, for groups, groups are specific to a customer or location. So every customer and every location isn't going to see the same things here because each job site is going to be a little bit different. But you'd be able to go in here, set this up however you want. You can add new by hitting the plus button in the top right, or you can hit the little plus button there on the side, so the little black plus, and that'll let you go in and do a subgroup. So main entry. So hit OK. That adds that for my first floor as a sub. I'll tap on that to select it. Then I get my model and serial number, so we'll just go ahead and do something basic here. Serial numbers again, just type that in there. And then the location field, again, this is going to be something that you can use here with the grouping functionality to get some extra juice out of it. So it's on the first floor at the main entry. Maybe that's not specific enough. So you could tap on the location field. Well, should be able to tap on it here. There we go. And then we can type in whatever we want to put in here. So behind Fern, left corner. So you can leave a little bit more detail there. You could also use the little gray pen and drop a GPS coordinate. But the next option there, install date, warranty expiration date, those are just date pickers. So when you open those up, it takes you into a date selector. So we go in there and set those up. And then you'll have your general notes. So Chris, just to kind of touch back on this, I'm gonna go ahead and add something in here just so we can see what that looks like. So notes, persistent issues, general notes. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit back. And then down here, if we've got any kind of quantity and rate information for standardized pricing, we can set that stuff up here. So just to show you this and how this works, I'm gonna go ahead and put in a quantity of 1. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put in, let's say, a standard rate. So 125 per visit, where we work on it. And then at the bottom, you got your user defined fields. So those are gonna be different based on, whatever you might have set up for that. But we'll go ahead and hit back. And then in here, you'll have your little check boxes along the side. As you do add in equipment or you want to use that serviced equipment functionality, that's what that service checkbox is going to be used for there. So somebody actually asked, Joshua asked if the GPS location information is in there, how do they use that? So when you put it in, you'll have that little black arrow on the right-hand side underneath my paperclip. If I do that and tap on it, that actually takes me over to my Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever you're using, and it'll give you driving directions, or walking directions would be probably the better use for that. But down at the bottom, we could switch over to walk, and it's going to give you, a rough estimate for where you'll need to walk to. Usually it's going to be within about 3 to 5 feet though. And then if you're actually inside of the mapping app, you'll be able to hit your little back arrow in the top left-hand corner. That'll take you out of that. But let's say I want to mark some of these things as service so that I can, indicate that we did some things with them. So I can go ahead and select my furnace, and I'll leave the RTU there. I'm going to go ahead and back out of this. Those are now marked as serviced equipment together. So now there's 2 entries in that field. So the first one we can see is my furnace, the one that I just added. So I can go in here, I can tap on that, go and enter whatever notes I might have for the serviced equipment notes. Reset after was tripped. So do that, hit your little back button, back again. And then when we see this stuff on the work order, we'll see all the text and everything that goes with that. Now they can remove these things if they accidentally add the wrong thing in and didn't mean to, mark something as service. So kind of keep that in mind. And then you also have the same kind of basic sort and filter functionalities there at the top. But again, this is going to be when you don't want to be able to bill for it. And then let's take a look over here in the job items for that add equipment functionality. So works the same way that it did back at the office level. So we'll go ahead and tap add equipment. In there, we can see all the equipment that's listed. So we can see those two pieces were marked as serviced and everything as well. I can go into my alarm panel there, and I'm going to go ahead and use the add equipment functionality for this one. So you can do a little blue eye, and then that's going to take you in and let you select whatever item you used. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here. We'll go ahead and grab just a ground here. Just grab that. So we put in the item that we need. In the field just below it, you can tap into it, or you can use a little calculator there and type in whatever you used. We'll say we did 1, and then we'll go ahead and hit the done button. So that took that item, inserted in here. And Chris, as we can see here, this is something I'll get put into our tracking system so we can get that kind of matched up there. But this would be what we would kind of be expecting to happen. So no notes went in there for that piece of equipment, and all of the details aside from notes went in. So for that, again, I'll get that taken a look at. But we go ahead and hit our X button, and that'll have that listed in there now. And then that is going to be how we show that stuff to the customer on the equipment. So we'll go ahead and scroll down. So at this point, if you're basically all done with your job, you'd finalize and send that stuff off like you normally would. One thing that I forgot to mention as we were in the equipment records, so you do have these little paper clips along the sides of all of these. So you can actually tap on those. If there's a photo attached to it, you'd be able to go in there and see that. So that's part of that Dropbox integration. Pull that back up. And for that, I think the Dropbox integration is not turned on here. So basically, when you're inside that equipment, when you tap on that little paper clip there, it's going to take you into any of the attachments for that record. So I know we've still got about 10 minutes here or so, 12 minutes until the end, but we're pretty much wrapped up with most of the material here. So what we're going to go through is just some of the basics of, what you guys have available to you here as we sign off of this. Now we'll stay in here if you guys have some extra questions, since we're scheduled until the 3 o'clock hour. We'll stick in here and keep an eye out for questions, but this is pretty much going to be about everything for the actual presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back over. So with all the material being covered for the day, the last thing that we kind of want to take a look at here is the things that you guys can use to kind of further your knowledge. So first option is going to be, again, smartservice.com/webinar. So you'll be able to find this webinar along with all of the previous webinars listed there for you guys to go to watch. It'll be about 24 hours or so before they're uploaded. And I think I saw somebody mention that they had popped in a little bit late. You'll be able to go back and watch that video sometime tomorrow afternoon. In addition to that, we're always releasing new updates and things like that. So at smartservice.com/web/updates rather, you'll be able to find the latest release notes and a link to the latest update. So make sure that you're getting on the latest updates for everything. For your iFleet users, just as a little side note, they can check their app stores to see if they need to get updated to anything. And the very last thing there, the smartservice.com/knowledge base. So that knowledge base has a boatload of information that is super helpful for new users, experienced users, middling users. So there's all kinds of videos, written tutorials, guides. So definitely check that one out. Nori, the previous one of our previous trainers, and I, we hammered on that pretty hard there for the last couple of years, trying to get it up to date and get it set up so that you guys can use it a little more effectively. But last thing here, we're going to also recommend that about every 2 years or so, you're going to want to probably get some extra training. because we're changing things all the time. And, these webinars are great, but they're not, specific to you guys as a company. So if you guys feel like you need to get any kind of extra training or anything like that, you can always reach out and we can see what we can do for you from that perspective. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and basically sign off here. Like I said, we'll stick in the chat panel there. So if you guys have extra questions or anything, just let us know and we'll take a look at those. But you guys have a great day and we'll talk to you here later.
Have a good one.
Yeah, bye-bye.